You felt it before it happened. That slow, quiet unraveling. The way their eyes stopped holding yours. The way their replies grew heavier, shorter, like stones sinking through water. You waited for the warmth to return. You waited for the version of them that used to look at you like you were the only thing anchoring them to the earth. But they didn't come back. They stepped away. And you stood there, holding the weight of a connection that suddenly felt like it was dissolving through your fingers. You replayed every conversation, every silence, every time you tried to close the distance and felt them pull back like a reflex. You asked yourself what you did wrong, what you could have said differently, what part of you wasn't enough. But the truth is, you were more than enough, and that's exactly why they left. You stayed because you believed love was a bridge, that if you just reached far enough, held on tight enough, proved yourself patient enough, they would finally cross it. But love isn't a bridge for someone who is terrified of the shore. Your presence became a mirror they couldn't face. Your devotion became a weight they couldn't carry. You thought your consistency would heal their fear. Instead, it triggered it. You thought your availability would make them feel safe. Instead, it made them feel trapped. You kept showing up, hoping they would learn how to stay. But you were asking a drowning person to teach you how to swim while you pulled them closer to the surface. They didn't leave because you failed. They left because they were failing themselves. And you kept handing them rope when they only knew how to knot it around their own throat. Let's pull back the curtain. Beneath the coldness, beneath the distance, beneath the quiet exits and the unread messages, there is a nervous system in survival mode. The amygdala doesn't read love letters. It reads proximity as threat. To an avoidant, closeness doesn't register as comfort. It registers as engulfment. Every time you leaned in, their brain registered a spike. Cortisol flooded the bloodstream. Heart rate quickened. Breath shortened. The body prepared for flight, not connection. Dopamine, the chemical of reward and anticipation, didn't fire when you showed up. It fired when you pulled back. When you gave them space, their nervous system exhaled. When you demanded closeness, their nervous system braced. This isn't malice. This is wiring. A deep, conditioned architecture built long before you ever met them. They didn't learn how to regulate overwhelm with another person. They learned how to regulate it by leaving, by numbing, by retreating into the quiet when no one could ask them to be vulnerable. So when you gave them everything, their system read it as a storm. And storms don't ask for shelter. They hide. They didn't stop caring. That's the myth you've been sold. That's the story your bruised ego keeps repeating to make the rejection easier to swallow. The truth is, they cared too much to stay. They felt the pull, the gravity, the terrifying realization that you were becoming essential to them. And essential means vulnerable. Vulnerable means exposure. Exposure means the risk of being seen, truly seen, and then potentially abandoned. Their nervous system couldn't hold that tension, so they disconnected. Not out of indifference, out of self-preservation. They shut down the channels that were flooding them. They dimmed the lights so the overwhelm wouldn't blind them. They walked away not because you were disposable, but because you were becoming too real, too present, too anchoring. And when you have spent a lifetime learning how to float by never touching the bottom, anchoring feels like drowning. So they let go. Not of you, of the panic, of the suffocation, of the terrifying weight of being loved by someone who expects them to stay. And here is where the shift begins. Not in chasing, not in pleading, not in trying to prove your worth through persistence. The shift begins in silence. Sacred, unbroken silence. Not the silence of punishment, not the quiet of resentment, the silence of detachment. The quiet of stepping off the stage and refusing to perform anymore. You stop explaining yourself. You stop decoding their distance. You stop measuring your value against their availability. You simply withdraw your energy from the equation. You stop feeding the cycle. You stop trying to translate their fear into something you can fix. You stop absorbing their panic as your fault. You become still. Not cold, not bitter. Still. And stillness is magnetic when you've been vibrating with anxiety for months. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It simply exists. And existence, when it's no longer desperate, becomes irresistible. You are no longer a mirror reflecting their chaos. You are a window reflecting your own calm. And that calm changes everything. Because when you stop trying to manage their emotional weather, you finally feel the sun on your own skin. You stop treating their absence like a personal failure. You stop treating their return like a redemption arc. You treat it like what it is, a pattern. And patterns only break when you stop feeding them. Picture them now, weeks after you've stepped back. The phone sits on the counter, screen dark. They don't reach for it like they used to. Not because they don't think of you, but because thinking of you no longer comes with the weight of expectation. They remember the way you used to look at them, the way you'd wait for their text, the way you'd adjust your schedule, your mood, your energy to match their rhythm. They remember the pressure they felt to reciprocate, the guilt when they couldn't, the exhaustion of trying to be the partner they thought you deserved. But now, there's no text, no call, no gentle nudge, just absence. And absence does something strange to an avoidant nervous system. It removes the threat. It creates space. And in that space, curiosity wakes up. They scroll past a song you used to love. They notice a coffee shop you frequented. They catch a phrase in a conversation that sounds exactly like something you'd say. And for a fraction of a second, the chest tightens. Not with panic, with longing. The dopamine system, starved of the very thing it once ran from, begins to stir. They wonder what you're doing, who you're with, if you've stopped waiting. And the realization hits them quietly, like a cold draft under a door. You have. You're not waiting. You're living. And that's when the mind starts to loop. They replay the last conversation. They dissect their own silence. They imagine your face when they finally reached out. They wonder if you'd even answer. The avoidance that once felt like freedom now feels like loss. The distance they built to protect themselves now feels like isolation. And the nervous system, once calibrated for flight, begins to recalibrate for return. They start noticing how quiet their world has become, how the space they carved out for themselves suddenly feels hollow, how the independence they used to wear like armor now feels like a cage. They thought distance would bring peace. Instead, it brought clarity. And clarity is a heavy thing when you've spent your life running from it. You don't have to do anything. That's the quiet revelation. You don't need to perform. You don't need to prove. You don't need to send the perfect message or show up at the right moment. Your absence did the work. Your detachment rewired the dynamic. Because when you stop chasing, you stop validating their fear. When you stop trying to earn their closeness, You stop reinforcing their belief that love is a transaction. When you finally walk away without drama, without ultimatums, without desperate bids for attention, you break the pattern they've spent their life navigating. And in that break, they feel it. The shift, the vacuum, the sudden realization that the person who loved them fiercely is no longer orbiting them. And that's when the chase begins. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet, internal kind. The late-night scroll, the hesitant draft that gets deleted, the sudden urge to hear your voice, the memory of your laugh, the phantom weight of your hand in theirs. They start wondering if they made a mistake. They start questioning their own narrative. They start missing you, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing presence they actively pushed away. And the irony is brutal. The very thing they ran from becomes the only thing they can think about. Because absence doesn't erase love, it clarifies it. And when you're no longer available to absorb their fear has nowhere to go but inward. That's when they feel it. The weight, the regret, the longing. Not because you changed, because you stopped. They thought they needed space to breathe. What they actually needed was the realization that they were holding their breath the whole time. And when you finally step out of the frame, they see the empty space you left behind. They see the life you built without them. They see the peace you found in your own company. And it terrifies them. Because for the first time, they're not running toward safety. They're running toward loss. But here is the danger. The moment they reach out, the moment they test the waters, the moment they send a vague message that sounds like a door cracking open, your nervous system will remember the old rhythm. The hope will spike. The dopamine will flood. The old you will whisper, "This is it. They're coming back. You just needed to wait." Do not mistake breadcrumbs for a meal. Do not confuse curiosity with commitment. Do not let a single text unravel months of healing. When they reach out, it will rarely be with clarity. It will be with hesitation, with testing, with a quiet demand to see if you're still available to absorb their chaos. If you respond with the same urgency, the same hope, the same willingness to fold yourself back into their rhythm, you reset the cycle. You teach them that flight is safe, that distance works, that they can leave and return without consequence. You become the emotional safety net they never had to build. And the moment you do, the chase stops. The longing fades. The nervous system relaxes back into avoidance. So protect your peace like it's the last oxygen in the room. Because it is. Do not trade your clarity for their confusion. Do not abandon your boundaries for their breadcrumbs. Let them feel the weight of their own absence. Let them sit in the quiet they created. Let them learn that closeness cannot be reclaimed through convenience. It must be earned through consistency, through presence, through the willingness to stay when it's hard, not just when it's easy, not just when they're lonely, not just when the silence gets too loud. If they return, let it be with clarity. Let it be with accountability. Let it be with the quiet understanding that you are no longer a place to hide. You are a place to belong. And belonging requires more than a text. It requires a choice. It requires the courage to stay when the panic rises. It requires the humility to admit that running was never the answer. It requires the strength to build a bridge and actually walk across it. Not just stand on the edge and watch you do all the work. This is where you step into yourself. Not the version of you that begged for scraps, Not the version that measured worth by their attention. Not the version that confused persistence with love. The version of you that finally understands your value isn't negotiable. That your energy isn't a resource to be spent on someone who treats it like a convenience. That your presence is a gift, not a given. You stop trying to fix what wasn't yours to carry. You stop interpreting their withdrawal as a reflection of your inadequacy. You stop building bridges to people who are content standing on the other side of the river. You reclaim your nervous system. You teach it that silence isn't abandonment, that distance isn't rejection, that your peace isn't conditional on their participation. You become untouchable. Not closed off, not hardened. Untouchable in the way that means you no longer outsource your worth. You no longer hand your stability to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. You stand in your own gravity. You breathe without waiting for permission. You love without losing yourself. And that shift doesn't just change how they see you, it changes how you see yourself. You realize you were never the problem. You were the mirror. And mirrors don't break when people look away. They simply reflect what's already there. You are whole. Not because they came back, not because they finally saw you. Whole because you finally saw yourself. Because you stopped waiting for their validation to prove your existence. Because you chose your peace over their panic. Because you stepped out of the storm and realized you were never meant to drown in someone else's fear. You were meant to stand in your own light. And when you do, the world adjusts. The dynamics shift. The energy recalibrates. Not because you played a game, because you finally stopped playing. You stopped chasing. You stopped explaining. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit into spaces you were never meant to occupy. You expanded. You breathed. You became the kind of person who doesn't need to be chosen to know their worth. You simply know it. And that knowing is unshakable. It doesn't crack when they leave. It doesn't tremble when they return. It just is. Steady. Grounded. Unapologetic. You are no longer waiting for someone to learn how to love you. You are too busy loving yourself. And in that love, you find the only freedom that ever mattered. The freedom to walk away. The freedom to stay. The freedom to choose yourself. Every single time.